You spend 20 years building something from bare metal in Greece, and it takes your own kid exactly 20 minutes to trade it away for cheap margaritas and tan lines. When I saw the empty garage, I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just picked up the phone. The smell of drip coffee and damp morning air is supposed to mean peace. For the last 15 years, my Tuesday routine hasn't changed. Wake up at 5, brew a pot of whatever cheap dark roast is on sale, walk out to the detached garage, flip the heavy metal toggle switch that kicks on the fluorescent shop lights. That morning, the lights flickered, hummed, and illuminated nothing. My 1968 Ford F-100 Ranger was gone. I stood in the doorway, the cheap ceramic mug burning my thumb, just staring at the empty bay. The concrete floor was clean, save for a rectangular ghost of dust outlining where the tires usually sat. There was a single drop of clean amber oil on the cardboard mat I kept underneath the oil pan. That was it. No shattered glass, no tire marks, just an empty, gaping hole where a massive piece of my life used to be. This wasn't just a vehicle. It was a boxwood green and Wimbledon white time capsule. I bought the rusted-out shell when my daughter, Alice, was 8 years old. Over the next 15 years, I poured every ounce of spare time, spare cash, and sanity I had into bringing it back to life. I rebuilt the 390 cubic inch V8 engine from the block up. I spent 4 consecutive winters hunting down original chrome trim at swap meets. I sanded the body panels by hand until my fingerprints were worn smooth. The truck was a living, breathing testament to patience. I didn't immediately panic. The human brain is a funny piece of machinery. It tries to protect you with mundane excuses before it hands you the truth. Did I leave it at the alignment shop? No. I picked it up Thursday. Did I park it in the driveway? No. It hasn't slept outside since 2018. The cold realization started in my boots and worked its way up to my chest. I turned around and walked back into the house. The silence of the hallway felt heavy. I walked past the kitchen, past the framed photos of a younger me and a younger Alice smiling at the state fair, and headed straight for the hall closet. On the top shelf, behind the extra heavy-duty trash bags, sat a cheap, gray, fire-safe lockbox. I pulled it down. The lock was mangled. Someone had taken a flathead screwdriver and wedged it under the latch, prying the cheap metal until the locking mechanism gave way. The lid sat slightly ajar. I opened it, birth certificates, passports, the deed to the house, all there. The pink slip to the Ford was gone. I dropped the box. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull, heavy thud. I didn't need to call the police. Not yet. I didn't need to check for broken windows. I already knew the thief. She had a key to the front door, and she knew exactly where I kept the title. Alice. She's 23 years old. She still lives in the bedroom she grew up in, though now it's filled with ring lights, tripods, and cardboard boxes from fast fashion brands she reviews for an audience of strangers. We haven't had a real conversation in 2 years. Every interaction is transactional. She needs a tire replaced. She needs an advance on her car insurance. She needs help covering her half of the phone bill. Her mother walked out on us when Alice was 12. It broke her, and it broke me. My mistake was trying to fix it with leniency. I tried to be the fun dad, the accommodating dad, the safety net that never frayed. I thought I was protecting her from the harshness of the world. Instead, I insulated her from consequence. I didn't raise a resilient adult. I raised a consumer, a parasite who views my resources as her birthright. I walked into her bedroom. The door was wide open. Her bed was unmade. The closet doors were thrown back. Hangers scattered across the carpet. Her 2 massive hard-shell suitcases were missing. I walked back to the kitchen. I set my coffee mug down on the counter. It was cold now. I leaned over the sink, gripping the faux granite edges until my knuckles turned white. She didn't just steal a car. She stole 15 years of my labor. She stole the late nights, the skinned knuckles, the quiet pride of building something permanent. She took it all, tossed it in a blender, and hit liquefy. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my mug against the wall. I just breathed in the stale kitchen air, wiped my hands on my jeans, and reached into my pocket for my phone. The grief was gone. It evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp, and deeply cynical clarity. I opened the Haggerty Insurance app on my phone. When you insure a classic vehicle for an agreed value of $60,000, the underwriters don't just take your word that it sits in a locked garage. They require a hardwired GPS tracker. I installed it myself 3 years ago, burying the little black module deep behind the dashboard, drawing power directly from the fuse block. Alice didn't know about it. Alice doesn't know what a carburetor is, let alone a hidden telematics unit. The app loaded. A map of the city popped up. There was a little red dot blinking on Interstate 95, moving south at exactly 65 miles per hour, heading straight for the international airport. I knew exactly why. It all clicked together like a socket on a bolt. 3 days ago, we had the worst fight of our lives. It was in this very kitchen. She had slammed a glossy, print-out itinerary on the island counter. A content creator wellness retreat in Tulum, Mexico. 10 days of beachfront villas, guided meditation, and networking with other people desperate to be famous on the internet. The cost? $8,000. She didn't ask me for the money. She told me she needed me to co-sign a high-interest personal loan so she could afford it. She called it an investment in her brand. I told her absolutely not. I told her to get a job that provided a W-2 instead of waiting for a sponsorship from a teeth-whitening company. I told her she was 23 and it was time to join the real world. She looked at me like I was something she had stepped in. She told me I was a failure. She told me I was holding her back out of spite because I was content living a miserable, grease-stained life. She screamed that she would find a way to go, with or without me. She found a way. I grabbed my keys off the pegboard. I walked out to the driveway and got into my daily driver, a 2012 Honda Civic with a dented fender and a squeaky serpentine belt. I bought this piece of junk specifically so I could throw my real money into the truck, so I could keep a roof over her head. The irony tasted like battery acid. I merged onto I-95 South. The morning commute was just starting to thicken. Brake lights flashed in the gray morning drizzle. I kept my phone in the cup holder, the screen unlocked, watching the red dot creep closer to the airport. My mind was racing, connecting the dots of her plan. She couldn't just sell a vintage truck to a dealership. It takes time, appraisals, inspections. She had to have found a private buyer, someone willing to hand over cash on the spot. She probably listed it on some classic car forum or a private Facebook group, pricing it way below market value for a quick sale. $20,000, $30,000. It didn't matter to her. She just needed enough to cover the Tulum trip and maybe buy a few new designer bags for the photos. She sold my blood and sweat for a vacation. The Civic rattled as I pushed it up to 80 miles per hour. I watched the other drivers around me, men in suits holding travel mugs, women applying makeup in the rearview mirror, normal people living normal lives. I wondered how many of them had kids who viewed them as ATMs. I wondered how many of them were terrified of the monsters they had created in their own guest bedrooms. Modern parenting tells you to validate their feelings. It tells you to be their friend. It tells you that every action is a cry for help or a symptom of trauma. But driving down that highway, I realized something dark and liberating. Sometimes people are just selfish. Sometimes your own kid is just a terrible person. The red dot on my screen stopped moving. It was stationary. Terminal 3, long-term parking structure. Level 4. She wasn't shipping the truck. She wasn't driving it to a buyer's house. She had the buyer meet her right at the airport. It was bold. It was sociopathic in its efficiency. Hand over the keys, take the cash, walk across the pedestrian bridge, and board a plane to Mexico. By the time I came home from work and found the garage empty, she would be drinking mezcal on a beach, entirely untouchable. I pulled the Civic into the airport entrance lane, merging past the taxi queue. I grabbed a ticket from the automated dispenser. The gate arm lifted. I drove up the winding concrete ramp, the tires squealing softly against the painted pavement. Level 1, Level 2, Level 3, Level 9. The air up here smelled of jet exhaust and stale urine. The harsh yellow sodium lights buzzed overhead. I pulled the Civic into a spot near the elevator banks, put it in park, and killed the engine. I took a deep breath. My hands weren't shaking. I wasn't angry anymore. I was operating purely on procedure. I stepped out of the car. The parking structure was vast, a sea of gray concrete and dull sedans left behind by business travelers, but a 1968 Ford F-100 stands out. It's a wide, aggressive slab of Detroit steel. I spotted the boxwood green roofline instantly, parked 3 rows over, near the pedestrian bridge that led directly to the international terminal. I didn't run toward it. I walked slowly, sticking to the perimeter, keeping behind the massive concrete support pillars. I was a ghost, haunting my own life. I got within 50 feet and stopped behind a pillar. I peeked around the rough concrete edge. There she was, Alice. She was dressed for a runway show, not a Tuesday morning in a parking garage. She wore an oversized linen blazer, wide-leg trousers, and large designer sunglasses. 2 massive aluminum hard-shell suitcases sat at her feet. She was leaning against the tailgate of my truck, looking at her phone, totally relaxed. Standing next to her was a guy, mid-50s, wearing khaki cargo shorts and a tight polo shirt. He looked like every guy who ever lowballed me at a car show. He was holding a thick manila envelope. I watched the transaction happen in real time. He walked a slow circle around the truck. He kicked the front tire. He peered through the driver's side window at the immaculate leather bench seat I had stitched myself. He nodded, clearly thrilled. He probably thought he was ripping off a clueless kid. He probably thought she inherited it from a dead grandfather and just wanted the quick cash. Alice reached into her expensive leather tote bag and pulled out the pink slip. My pink slip. The one with my forged signature on the back. She handed it to him. The guy looked at the title, checked the VIN plate on the door jamb, and nodded again. He handed her the manila envelope. Alice didn't even count it. She just squeezed the envelope to feel the thickness, smiled, and dropped it into her tote bag. She handed him my keys, the heavy brass ones on the leather ring I've carried since 2008. The guy climbed into the cab. He turned the key. The 390 V8 roared to life. The exhaust note echoed off the concrete walls, a deep, rhythmic rumble that rattled my ribs, even from 50 feet away. It was the sound of my own heartbeat, driving away from me. He threw it into drive and rolled down the aisle, heading for the exit ramp. Alice didn't even watch him leave. She immediately grabbed the handles of her suitcases, turned on her heel, and began rolling them toward the glass doors of the pedestrian bridge. She was heading to the terminal, heading to TSA, heading to Tulum. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I dialed 911. 911. What is your emergency? The dispatcher answered. Her voice was flat, bored. I need to report a grand theft auto, I said. My voice was eerily steady. A 1968 Ford F-100. Boxwood green. License plate is. I rattled off the numbers. Okay, sir. Where did the theft occur? It's happening right now. The vehicle is currently exiting the Terminal 3 long-term parking structure at the international airport. The driver is a white male in his 50s, but he isn't the thief. Sir, I'm confused. Who stole the vehicle? My daughter, I said. The words tasted like ash. She forged the title and just sold it to that man for cash. She is currently walking across the level 4 pedestrian bridge toward Terminal 3 departures. Okay, sir. I am dispatching airport police to intercept the vehicle at the toll booths. Are you currently on the scene? I am. Stay where you are. Officers will meet you. I hung up. I didn't stay where I was. I walked to the edge of the parking structure and looked down at the toll plaza. 3 minutes later, a white SUV with flashing red and blue lights swerved across the lanes, cutting off my green Ford just as the buyer handed his parking ticket to the attendant. 2 officers stepped out, hands resting on their holstered weapons. I watched the buyer throw his hands up in panic. He pointed frantically up toward the parking structure, then toward the terminal. I turned around and walked toward the pedestrian bridge. The airport was crowded. Travelers rushing with coffees, kids crying, announcements blaring over the PA system. I walked through the sliding glass doors into Terminal 3. I bypassed the ticketing counters. Alice already had her boarding pass on her phone. She would be going straight to security. I found her at the entrance to the TSA pre-check line. She was standing behind a family of 4, casually scrolling through Instagram. The thick manila envelope was still safely tucked inside her bag. She looked entirely at peace. She looked victorious. 2 airport police officers were jogging toward the checkpoint from the opposite direction, their radios crackling. The buyer down at the toll booth had obviously given them a very good description. They spotted her at the exact same moment I did. I walked up to the back of the line. I stood right behind her. I could smell her expensive vanilla perfume. "Have a good trip, Alice?" I asked softly. She spun around. Her sunglasses slipped down her nose. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax mannequin. Her eyes darted from me, to the empty space behind me, and finally to the 2 armed police officers who were now flanking her. "Dad," she whispered, her voice trembling. What are you doing here?" "I came to see you off," I said, my voice dead and hollow. The taller of the 2 officers stepped forward. "Alice, we need you to step out of line, please. Your bag, too." "Alice, we need you to step out of line, please. Your bag, too." The officer's voice wasn't aggressive. It was the calm, practiced tone of a man who dealt with panicking tourists and aggressive drunks every day. But Alice wasn't a tourist, and she wasn't drunk. She was a cornered animal realizing the trap had just snapped shut. She didn't move. She stood frozen on the cheap gray airport carpeting, her fingers white-knuckling the handles of her designer tote. People in the TSA line were starting to stare. A businessman behind her nervously shifted his laptop bag. "Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a frantic, breathless whisper. "Dad, tell them, it's fine. Tell them you let me borrow it." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the expensive linen blazer paid for with my credit card. I saw the premium highlights in her hair, subsidized by my grocery budget. And I saw the absolute, terrifying conviction in her eyes that she could lie her way out of this, just like she always did. "I can't do that, Alice," I said. My voice was steady, but my stomach felt like it was full of broken glass. "Because you didn't borrow it." The taller officer stepped closer, gently but firmly placing a hand on her elbow. "Ma'am, step out of the line. Now." She jerked her arm away. It was a stupid, reflexive reaction, but in a post 9/11 airport, it was the worst thing she could have done. The second officer instantly closed the gap. His hand hovered near his utility belt. The bored atmosphere of the security checkpoint vanished, replaced by a sudden, rigid tension. "Don't touch me," she snapped, her voice pitching up into a shrill register. She turned back to me, her eyes wide, flashing with a sudden vicious anger. "Are you psychotic? You tracked me? Over a stupid, rusted-out piece of metal? It's a car. I needed the money for my career." "Ma'am, I am not going to ask you again," the first officer said. "Bring the bag and come with us to the screening room, or you will be placed on the ground right here." The threat finally punctured her delusion. She looked at the officers, then at the crowd of onlookers holding their phones, recording her humiliation. Her shoulders slumped. She grabbed the handle of her suitcase and dragged it out of the queue, her head down. I followed them to a small, windowless room just off to the side of the main checkpoint. The walls were cinder block, painted a sterile, institutional white. A stainless steel table sat in the center. "Put the bag on the table," the officer ordered. Alice placed the leather tote on the metal surface. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely let go of the straps. "Do you have anything dangerous in here? Weapons? Sharps?" "No," she whispered. The officer opened the bag. He bypassed the makeup pouches and the travel-sized perfumes. He reached right into the center and pulled out the thick, overstuffed manila envelope. He flipped the metal clasp and dumped the contents onto the table. Stacks of $100 bills spilled out, bound in cheap rubber bands. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the muffled drone of the PA system outside the door. "Radio down to Miller," the tall officer said over his shoulder to his partner. "Ask the buyer how much he paid." His partner keyed the mic on his shoulder. Static crackled. A moment later, a distorted voice replied. "Buyer states 28,000 in hundreds." He says the girl handed him the title. The officer looked at the money on the table, then at Alice. He didn't even bother counting it. The evidence was overwhelming. "Are you the registered owner of the 1968 Ford?" the officer asked, looking at me. "Yes," I said. "My name is on the title. Only my name. Did you authorize the sale or transfer of this vehicle?" Alice stared at me. Her mascara had started to run, leaving faint gray tracks down her cheeks. The arrogance was entirely gone. She was 23, but in that moment she looked like the 12-year-old girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee in the driveway. A massive, crushing wave of parental instinct hit me. Everything in my biology screamed at me to protect her, to say it was a misunderstanding, to take the money, take the keys, and drive her home. But if I did that, she would never stop. She would bleed me dry, bury me in debt, and step over my grave to get what she wanted. I swallowed the lump in my throat. It felt like swallowing a golf ball. "No," I said. "I did not." The officer nodded. He pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clink echoed loudly in the small room. "Alice," he said, stepping behind her, "put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for grand theft auto and forgery." "Dad, please," she screamed. It wasn't a calculated manipulation anymore. It was pure, unadulterated terror. "Dad, don't let them do this. I'm sorry. I'll give it back. I won't go to Mexico. Please, turn around, ma'am." The officer grabbed her wrists, crossed them behind her back, and snapped the cuffs shut. The sound was horribly final. I stood there, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, watching the only family I had left get processed like a common criminal. I didn't look away. I owed it to both of us to watch the consequence play out. The airport police substation was located on the ground floor of the parking garage, hidden behind a row of heavy concrete bollards. It smelled of industrial floor wax and stale sweat. I sat in a hard plastic chair in the waiting area, staring at a bulletin board covered in outdated union notices. 2 hours had passed. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a hollow, aching exhaustion. A detective named Harrison finally walked through the secure double doors. He was a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a cheap tie. He carried a clipboard. "Mr. Davis," he said, gesturing for me to follow him. He led me into a cramped office. A desk fan rattled in the corner. He sat down and flipped through the paperwork on his clipboard. "All right," Harrison sighed, rubbing his temples. "We've got a mess here. The buyer, a guy named Elias Vance, is cooperating. He handed over the keys and the forged title. He's furious, obviously. He's out 28 grand, and since that money is now evidence in a felony fraud case, it's going into an evidence locker. He won't see a dime of it until a judge orders it released, which could take months." "In the truck?" I asked. "The truck is currently sitting in our impound lot behind Terminal 1. We've verified the VIN and your ownership. Once you sign these release forms, you're free to take it." Harrison slid a piece of paper across the desk. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy. "Before you sign that," Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave, "I need to be crystal clear with you. We are charging your daughter with grand theft auto and uttering a forged instrument. Both are felonies. If you sign this statement confirming you did not authorize the sale, the state picks up the case. It won't matter if you change your mind tomorrow and want to drop the charges. It's out of your hands. She will face prosecution. She will likely do jail time." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I've seen a lot of parents sitting where you are. They get angry, they call the cops, but when reality sets in, they back out. If you're going to back out, tell me now, before I process this paperwork and ruin this kid's life." "She ruined her own life," I said. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. The ink was dark and permanent. Harrison nodded slowly. He didn't judge me. He just took the paper back. She asked to see you. She's in holding cell 3. Down the hall. Take a left. You have 5 minutes. I stood up. My knees popped. I walked out of the office and down the narrow hallway. The concrete walls were painted a sickly pale green. I found cell number 3. It was a small room behind a thick pane of reinforced glass. Alice was sitting on a metal bench. Her oversized blazer was gone. Her designer sunglasses were gone. She just looked small, pale, and terrified. When she saw me through the glass, she jumped up and rushed to the window. There was a metal grate in the glass for speaking. I stood a foot away from it. "Dad," she sobbed, pressing her hands against the glass. "Dad, they took my shoelaces. They took my phone. You have to get me out of here. Tell them you made a mistake. Tell them I can come home." I looked at her. I searched her face for an ounce of genuine remorse. I didn't see regret for what she did to me. I only saw regret that she got caught. "You can't come home, Alice," I said. My voice was quiet, stripped of all emotion. Her sobbing stopped. She stared at me, her eyes widening in disbelief. What? What are you talking about? You're going to leave me here? I'm your daughter." "You're a biological relative who views me as a bank account," I replied. "You stole a piece of my life to pay for a vacation. You forged my signature. You sold a vehicle that wasn't yours to an innocent man who is now out $28,000 because of your greed. I was going to pay you back," she yelled, slamming her palm against the glass. The heavy thud echoed in the hallway. "When I got famous, I would have bought you 10 trucks. You're just jealous. You want me to be a miserable, trapped loser just like you." The venom in her voice was pure. It was the real Alice. The mask was completely off. "I'm not trapped," I said gently. "I built a life I respect. You tried to build a life on theft and illusions. The difference is, my truck is real. Your internet fame isn't." I turned away from the glass. "Dad, don't you walk away from me," she screamed through the grate. "If you walk out that door, I will never speak to you again. I mean it. You're dead to me." I stopped, looking over my shoulder one last time. "I know," I said. "Goodbye, Alice." I walked back down the hallway, the sound of her fists pounding against the reinforced glass fading behind me with every step. I didn't look back again. I walked to the front desk, took the heavy brass keys from the evidence clerk, and walked out into the damp afternoon air. The impound lot was a desolate stretch of cracked asphalt surrounded by razor wire. My F-100 sat in the back corner, looking entirely out of place among the wrecked sedans and abandoned minivans. The boxwood green paint caught the dull afternoon light. I unlocked the heavy door, climbed into the cab, and slid onto the leather bench seat. The cabin smelled faintly of gasoline and old vinyl, exactly the way it had for 15 years. I slid the key into the ignition and turned it. The 390 V8 fired up instantly, settling into a deep, rhythmic idle. No hesitation, no complaints, just heavy, mechanical loyalty. I pulled out of the impound lot and merged back onto I-95 North. The rain had stopped, leaving the highway slick and reflective. I didn't turn on the radio. I just listened to the hum of the tires on the wet pavement and the steady thrum of the exhaust. The drive home felt incredibly long. The adrenaline had completely metabolized, leaving my body heavy and my mind unnervingly clear. The anger was gone. The grief was gone. All that remained was a profound, hollow acceptance of reality. I had spent years trying to patch the holes in my daughter's character with money and patience, ignoring the fact that the foundation was completely rotten. I pulled into my driveway. The house was quiet. My dented Honda Civic was parked exactly where I had left it. I backed the F-100 into the garage. I turned the key, killing the engine. The sudden silence in the concrete bay was deafening. I climbed out, pulled the heavy metal garage door down, and listened to it latch with a solid click. I walked into the house. The kitchen was exactly as I had left it that morning. My cold, half-empty coffee mug still sat on the faux granite counter. The gray fire-safe lockbox still sat on the floor in the hallway, its lid pried open and mangled. I stepped over it and walked to the front door. I went out to the garage, dug through my red metal tool chest, and found a brand new deadbolt, still in its plastic clamshell packaging. I had bought it 6 months ago, meaning to install it on the back patio door, but never got around to it. I grabbed a Phillips head screwdriver, walked back to the front door, and went to work. I unscrewed the old brass faceplate. The screws squeaked as they backed out of the wood. I pulled the cylinder free and tossed it onto the entryway table. It hit the wood with a heavy clatter. I slid the new deadbolt into place, threading the long metal screws and tightening them down until they bit deep into the door frame. I tested the lock. Click. Smooth and solid. Alice's key wouldn't work anymore. Even if she made bail, even if she somehow found her way back to this street, she couldn't get in. The boundary was finally, physically set. Next, I walked down the hall to her bedroom. The door was still wide open. The hangers were still scattered across the carpet. The ring light still stood in the corner, staring at the empty bed like a giant glowing cyclops. I didn't tear the room apart. I didn't break anything. I went to the garage, grabbed a stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes I had saved from a refrigerator delivery, and brought them into her room. I grabbed a roll of heavy-duty packing tape. I started with the closet. I pulled down the cheap, fast-fashion dresses she wore once for a photo and never touched again. I folded them and placed them in the box. I packed the shoes. I packed the makeup. I packed the ring light. I worked methodically, taping each box shut and dragging it out to the living room, stacking them neatly by the front door. It took me 4 hours. By the time I taped the final box shut, the sun had set. The bedroom was entirely bare. The posters were gone. The clutter was gone. It was just a room again. 4 empty walls and a vacuumed carpet. I walked back out to the garage. I didn't turn on the harsh fluorescent overheads. I just left the door connecting to the house cracked open, letting the warm yellow light spill across the concrete floor. I walked over to the F-100 and sat on the tailgate. The metal was cool against my jeans. I looked at the dark silhouette of the truck. 15 years of labor. It had survived rust. It had survived blown head gaskets. And today, it had survived a betrayal I never saw coming. I failed her as a father. I knew that. I failed to teach her that the world doesn't care about her feelings, that respect is earned, and that actions carry a massive, terrifying weight. I shielded her from the fire for so long that she never learned not to touch the stove. Today she burned her hand, and the scars would last a lifetime. But as I sat there in the quiet dark of my own garage, surrounded by the smell of oil and old steel, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in a decade. Peace. The parasite was gone. The host had survived. And tomorrow, at 5 in the morning, I would wake up, brew a pot of cheap dark roast, and come out here to work, because the truck, unlike the girl who tried to sell it, could actually be fixed. That's the end of the line, folks. Sometimes, cutting ties is the only way to save yourself, even if it's your own flesh and blood. If you found this story relatable, or if you've ever dealt with an entitled kid who needed a harsh reality check, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real, grounded stories. Leave a comment down below. Do you think I went too far by pressing charges, or did she get exactly what she deserved? I read every single one. See you next time.